You know that moment when someone tries to convince you of something and you feel this immediate, almost physical resistance in your chest? Not anger, not defensiveness, but something quieter and more certain. A voice that says, "This does not align with what I know to be true." You pause. You question. You hold your ground without needing to shout about it. That resistance is not stubbornness or cynicism. It is cognitive maturity operating at its highest level, and most people never develop it fully. They spend entire lifetimes being swayed by persuasive voices, charismatic leaders, clever advertisements, emotional manipulators who know exactly which psychological buttons to press. They agree to things they do not want. They adopt beliefs that contradict their experience. They surrender their judgment to whoever speaks with the most confidence, and they do this repeatedly, wondering why their lives feel shaped by forces outside their control. The exhaustion that comes from this is profound. You feel like a leaf in the wind, tossed between conflicting opinions, unable to land on solid ground. Your relationships suffer because you cannot trust your own perceptions. Your career stalls because you follow advice that serves others, but not you. Your sense of self becomes blurry, derivative, constructed from fragments of what other people insist you should think and feel and believe. This is not a minor inconvenience. This is a crisis of cognitive autonomy, and it affects everything. Jean Piaget spent over 6 decades studying how human beings develop the capacity to think independently, and what he discovered should fundamentally change how we understand mental strength. He did not study manipulation directly. He studied something far more foundational: how the mind constructs reality, how it learns to test that reality against evidence, and how it reaches the stage where it can hold firm against distortion. Piaget discovered that cognitive development is not merely about accumulating knowledge. It is about building mental structures that allow you to process information with increasing sophistication, to recognize when someone is attempting to override your reasoning, and to stand in your own intellectual authority without needing external validation. The mind that has reached what Piaget called formal operational thought, combined with equilibration at its most refined level, becomes extraordinarily difficult to manipulate. Not because it is closed or dogmatic, but because it has developed internal systems of verification that automatically flag inconsistency, logical fallacy, emotional coercion, and appeals to authority that bypass evidence. Today I am going to show you the 7 signs that your mind has reached this level of development, the signs that indicate you are becoming cognitively immune to manipulation, and why understanding these signs through Piaget's framework gives you a roadmap for protecting your mental autonomy in a world designed to undermine it. In 1936, Piaget published his observations of infants in Geneva, and one case stood out with particular clarity. A child of 8 months was presented with a toy hidden beneath a blanket. The child watched the toy disappear, watched the blanket cover it completely, and then simply looked away. The toy, for this child, had ceased to exist. Piaget returned to this same child 3 months later. Now 11 months old, the child watched the same toy vanish beneath the same blanket, but this time the child reached for the blanket, pulled it away, and retrieved the toy with obvious satisfaction. Something had shifted in the mental structure. The child had developed object permanence, the understanding that things continue to exist even when they are out of sight. This seems trivial until you realize what it represents. The child had moved from a reality dictated entirely by immediate perception to a reality that included invisible structures, continuity beneath the surface, stability that persists despite appearances. This is the very beginning of cognitive independence. The child no longer accepts the world as it appears in each isolated moment. The child has begun to construct a mental model that resists the manipulation of changing appearances. Piaget understood that this process does not stop at infancy. It continues through childhood, adolescence, and if circumstances support it, into adulthood. But most people arrest somewhere along the way. They develop partial structures. They can think abstractly in some domains, but not others. They can reason logically when calm, but collapse into magical thinking under stress. They achieve formal operations in their profession, but remain at concrete operational levels in their personal relationships, which is why a brilliant scientist can be emotionally manipulated by a partner, or a sharp lawyer can fall for a financial scam that a teenager would recognize. Piaget mapped these stages not to categorize people, but to show that cognitive maturity is constructed step by step, and each step either strengthens your immunity to manipulation or leaves you vulnerable. The 7 signs I'm going to walk you through are not personality traits. They are structural indicators. They reveal whether your cognitive architecture has developed the features that make manipulation almost impossible to execute against you. The first sign is that you automatically question emotional appeals that bypass logic. You are in a meeting, and someone presents a proposal. The data's thin, the reasoning is circular, but the person presenting is passionate, their voice rising with conviction, their language saturated with urgency and moral weight. You feel the pull. Something in you wants to agree, wants to join the energy in the room, wants to avoid being the person who disrupts the momentum. But another part of you, quieter and more stable, steps in and says, "Wait, I need to see the evidence behind this feeling." That capacity, that automatic pause, is a sign of what Piaget called decentering. In his studies of children aged 4 to 7, Piaget found that young children are cognitively egocentric. They cannot separate their perspective from reality itself. If they feel something, it must be true. If they want something, the world should provide it. They do not yet have the cognitive structure to step outside their own subjective experience and evaluate it objectively. As they move into concrete operations around age 7, they begin to decenter. They realize that their perspective is one among many. They start to test their feelings against external evidence. By the time someone reaches formal operations, usually around age 12 but often much later or never, they can do this automatically even under emotional pressure. They feel the pull of the emotional appeal, but they do not mistake that feeling for a reason to believe. They have built a mental checkpoint that says feelings are data, not verdicts. Manipulators rely on people who have not built this checkpoint. They flood you with emotion, knowing that if they can make you feel intensely enough, you will skip the step of logical evaluation. If you find yourself consistently able to feel the emotion but still ask, "Where is the evidence?" you have developed one of the core structures of a manipulation-resistant mind. The second sign is that you notice inconsistencies that others overlook. Piaget spent years asking children questions that revealed their logical structures. He would show a child 2 identical glasses of water, then pour one glass into a tall, thin container, and ask which container had more water. Children in the pre-operational stage, typically under age 7, would say the tall container had more because it looked like more. They were dominated by perception. Children who had reached concrete operations would say the amount was the same because nothing was added or removed. They had developed conservation, the understanding that quantity remains constant despite changes in appearance. This is a logical structure, not just a piece of knowledge. Once built, it applies across contexts. An adult with fully developed conservation does not just understand that water volume stays the same. They understand that a person's character stays relatively stable, even if their behavior changes in response to circumstances. They understand that the value of an idea does not change just because it is repackaged in more attractive language. They notice when someone says 2 things that cannot both be true. A politician claims to support small government and also promises expanded federal programs. A partner insists they value honesty but repeatedly lies about small things. A company markets itself as environmentally conscious while its supply chain depends on practices that devastate ecosystems. Most people do not notice these contradictions because they process each statement in isolation. They lack the cognitive structure to hold multiple pieces of information in mind simultaneously and compare them for logical consistency. If you find yourself constantly spotting contradictions that others accept without question, it means your mind has built the reversibility and conservation structures that Piaget identified as essential for operational thought. You are not just collecting information, you are actively testing it against itself, and that makes you far harder to deceive. The third sign is that you can hold your position without needing external validation. Piaget observed that children progress from heteronomy, where rules and truths come from external authorities, to autonomy, where they internalize principles and can evaluate situations independently. A child in the heteronomous stage believes that lying is wrong because adults say so. A child in the autonomous stage understands that lying is wrong because it damages trust and makes cooperation impossible. The first child follows rules. The second child understands principles. This distinction becomes critical in adulthood. When someone tries to manipulate you by invoking authority, expert opinion, majority consensus, or social pressure, they are appealing to heteronomy. They are saying you should believe this because people you respect believe it, because everyone believes it, because it would be socially costly not to believe it. A mind that has developed autonomy does not dismiss these inputs, but it does not treat them as sufficient. It asks, does this align with principles I have tested and found reliable? Does this make sense within the framework of evidence I have accumulated? Can I articulate why this is true, or am I just repeating what I have been told? If you find that you can disagree with the majority, with experts, with people you admire, and feel no internal collapse, no desperate need to conform or be reassured that you are right, it means you have developed autonomous moral and intellectual judgment. You have internalized a system of evaluation that operates independently of social reinforcement. Manipulators cannot touch this. They can pressure you, shame you, isolate you, but they cannot make you doubt what you have verified through your own cognitive processes. This is one of the most liberating structures a mind can build. I want to pause here for a moment because I know what many of you are feeling right now. You are reading these signs and recognizing some in yourself, but not others. You are realizing that in certain areas of your life you think with clarity and independence, but in other areas you are still vulnerable, still swayed by voices that should not have power over you. Maybe you are sharp in your career, but you crumble under emotional manipulation in your relationships. Maybe you can spot logical fallacies in political arguments, but you fall for marketing tactics that exploit your insecurities. Maybe you have moments of absolute certainty and other moments where you feel like you know nothing at all. Here is what I need you to understand. This unevenness is not a failure. It is completely normal, and Piaget would say it is evidence that your cognitive development is ongoing. You are not stuck. You are in process. The question is not, are you perfectly immune to manipulation? The question is, are you building the structures that increase your immunity over time? So I want to ask you something, and I want you to really think about it before you answer. What is the area of your life where you feel most easily swayed, most vulnerable to someone else's influence, most likely to agree to something you do not actually want? Is it in romantic relationships where loneliness makes you compromise your standards? Is it in your career where fear of failure makes you follow advice that does not fit your strengths? Is it in your family where old patterns of guilt and obligation override your adult judgment? Think about that specific area. Now imagine what it would feel like if you could bring the same clarity and independence you have in other parts of your life into that vulnerable space. Imagine if you could pause, evaluate, and choose with the same confidence. That is what we are building toward. If this resonates with you, leave a comment with just this simple phrase. I am learning to trust my own thinking. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to read today to feel less alone. You have more power to heal than you imagine. Your willingness to name where you are in this process gives others permission to do the same. And that kind of honesty is what transforms communities. So take a moment. Let me know. I am learning to trust my own thinking. That is all. Just that. And let us continue building these structures together. The fourth sign is that you test ideas against real-world outcomes instead of accepting them based on internal coherence alone. Piaget distinguished between figurative knowledge, which is static and descriptive, and operative knowledge, which is dynamic and transformational. Figurative knowledge tells you what things are. Operative knowledge tells you how things change and interact. A child who has reached concrete operations can engage in operative thought within tangible contexts. They can mentally reverse actions. They can understand cause and effect chains. They can predict outcomes based on observed patterns. But it is not until formal operations that someone can do this hypothetically, testing ideas in their mind before applying them in reality. Here is why this matters for manipulation resistance. Many belief systems, ideologies, sales pitches, and persuasive arguments are internally coherent. They make sense within their own logic. A conspiracy theory can be perfectly consistent if you accept its premises. A manipulative partner's explanation for their behavior can sound reasonable if you do not test it against what actually happens. A business opportunity can seem lucrative if you only evaluate the projected numbers and not the underlying model. A mind that has developed formal operational thought does not just ask, does this argument make sense? It asks if this is true. What would I expect to see in reality, and do I actually see that? It runs mental experiments. It makes predictions. It checks those predictions against outcomes. When reality does not match the theory, it updates the theory instead of distorting reality to fit. Piaget spent considerable time studying this with adolescents. He would present them with problems that required systematic hypothesis testing. Those who had reached formal operations would generate possibilities, test them mentally, eliminate what did not work, and arrive at solutions through logical deduction. Those who had not reached this stage would try random solutions, give up easily, or insist their answer was correct, despite evidence to the contrary. The parallel to manipulation is direct. If someone tells you that a particular diet will transform your health and you try it and your health worsens, do you conclude the diet does not work for you? Or do you conclude you must be doing it wrong? If someone promises that a certain approach to relationships will bring you happiness, and you apply it faithfully and feel more miserable, do you question the approach or do you question yourself? The ability to let outcomes override theory is a high-level cognitive achievement, and it is one of your strongest defenses against being trapped in belief systems that harm you. The fifth sign is that you automatically look for what is not being said. Piaget's concept of decentering applies not just to perspective taking, but to information processing. A concrete operational thinker focuses on what is present. A formal operational thinker considers what is absent. They ask what data is missing, what alternative explanations are not being mentioned, what consequences are being ignored. This becomes especially important in contexts where information is selectively presented to shape your perception. A company reports record revenue but does not mention declining profit margins. A news story emphasizes one victim but ignores others who do not fit the narrative. A persuasive speaker lists benefits but never addresses costs. A manipulator frames a choice as binary when multiple options exist. If you find yourself reflexively asking, "What am I not being told?" you have developed the cognitive structure that allows you to mentally construct the full picture even when only a partial image is offered. This is not paranoia. It is intellectual completeness. Piaget would say you are engaging in combinatorial thinking, the ability to systematically consider all possible combinations and permutations of variables. Children do not develop this until formal operations because it requires holding multiple possibilities in mind simultaneously, evaluating them in relation to each other, and identifying gaps. Adults who have not developed this structure take information at face value. They assume that what is presented is the totality of what matters. They do not realize that omission is one of the most powerful tools of manipulation because it shapes perception without triggering resistance. If you naturally scan for omissions, you are operating with one of the most sophisticated cognitive defenses available. The sixth sign is that you revise your beliefs when evidence contradicts them, and you do this without emotional collapse. Piaget called this equilibration, and it is the engine of cognitive growth. When new information conflicts with existing schemas, the mind experiences disequilibrium, an uncomfortable state of cognitive tension. There are two ways to resolve this. Assimilation, where you distort the new information to fit your existing framework, or accommodation, where you revise your framework to incorporate the new information. Children move through developmental stages by accommodating. They encounter experiences that their current schemas cannot explain, and instead of rejecting those experiences, they build new schemas. An infant who expects objects to fall and then sees a balloon rise must accommodate. A child who believes all four-legged animals are dogs must accommodate when they encounter a cat. An adolescent who believes authority figures are always right must accommodate when they encounter corruption. Each accommodation expands the complexity and accuracy of their mental model, but accommodation is uncomfortable. It requires admitting you were wrong. It requires rebuilding structures you relied on. It requires tolerating uncertainty while new schemas form. Many adults stop accommodating. They reach a point where their identity becomes fused with their beliefs, and any challenge to those beliefs feels like an existential threat. So they assimilate everything. They distort evidence, dismiss contradictions, avoid information that might disturb them, and surround themselves with people who reinforce their existing views. This makes them extraordinarily vulnerable to manipulation because manipulators offer certainty. They offer a story that never has to change, a framework that explains everything, a community that never challenges you. If you find that you can say, "I was wrong about that, I need to update my thinking," and you can do this without feeling like you are losing yourself, it means you have separated your identity from your beliefs. You understand that changing your mind is not weakness. It is evidence that your cognitive system is functioning as it should. Piaget would say you have achieved equilibration at a high level, and this makes you almost impossible to trap in a false belief system, because you are always willing to let reality reshape your understanding. The seventh sign is that you recognize when you are being cornered into binary thinking. Piaget's work on classification and seriation shows that cognitive development involves moving from simple either-or categories to complex, multidimensional classification systems. A young child thinks in absolutes. Things are good or bad, safe or dangerous, friend or enemy. As they develop concrete operations, they begin to understand gradations, overlaps, exceptions. By formal operations, they can hold paradoxes, understand that two apparently contradictory things can both be true in different contexts, and resist being forced into false dichotomies. Manipulators love binary thinking because it eliminates nuance. You are either with us or against us. You either accept this completely or you reject it completely. You either trust me entirely or you do not trust me at all. This framing shuts down the cognitive complexity that would allow you to say, "I agree with parts of this, but not others. I trust you in some areas, but not in others." This situation is more complicated than two options. If you find yourself reflexively resisting binary frames, asking, "What is the third option? What is the middle ground? What am I being forced to ignore by accepting this dichotomy?" it means your mind has built the classificatory complexity that formal operational thought requires. You are thinking in systems, not categories. You are recognizing that reality is almost never binary, and anyone who insists it is probably trying to limit your cognitive options, so you will choose the option they have pre-selected for you. These 7 signs are not innate traits. They are cognitive structures that Piaget spent his entire career mapping. And what makes his work so powerful is that he showed these structures can be built at any age, if the right conditions are present. You are not doomed to remain vulnerable to manipulation if you have not developed these structures yet. But you do need to understand what those conditions are. Piaget identified that cognitive development requires active engagement with problems that create disequilibrium, supportive environments that allow you to struggle without rescuing you prematurely, and time to consolidate new schemas before moving to the next challenge. In practical terms, this means you build manipulation resistance by deliberately exposing yourself to perspectives that challenge yours, by practicing holding contradictory information without immediately resolving it, by testing your beliefs against outcomes and being willing to be wrong, by surrounding yourself with people who think differently but respectfully, and by giving yourself permission to not know while you figure things out. There is a case that Piaget returned to repeatedly in his later work, a girl of 14 who had spent her entire childhood being told what to think by authoritarian parents. She excelled academically because she could memorize and repeat. But when Piaget interviewed her using his clinical method, asking her to explain not just what she believed but why she believed it, she collapsed into confusion. She could not trace her reasoning. She could not defend her positions. She could not even articulate whether her stated beliefs were actually hers or simply downloaded from external sources. Piaget did not see this as a failure of intelligence. He saw it as arrested development. Her cognitive structures had been kept in a state of perpetual heteronomy. She had never been allowed to struggle with disequilibrium, never been permitted to construct her own schemas through active experimentation, never developed the mental architecture that would allow her to think autonomously. But here is what happened next. Piaget worked with her over 2 years, not by teaching her what to think, but by creating conditions where she had to think. He presented problems with no clear answers. He asked her to justify her reasoning. He exposed contradictions in her logic, and then waited. allowing her to sit in the discomfort of not knowing. Slowly, painstakingly, she began to build the structures she had been denied. She started to question authority. She began testing ideas against evidence. She learned to tolerate the uncertainty of holding multiple perspectives simultaneously. By 16, she demonstrated formal operational thought that was indistinguishable from peers who had developed it naturally. She could engage in hypothetical reasoning, systematic problem-solving, and most importantly, she could recognize when someone was trying to manipulate her. The transformation was not magical. It was architectural. Her mind had built new structures, and those structures changed everything about how she interacted with information, with people, with her own internal experience. This is the promise that Piaget's work holds for every one of us. You are not fixed at your current level of cognitive development. The structures that make your mind resistant to manipulation can be built, reinforced, and expanded throughout your entire life. But you have to understand what you are building and why it matters. The 7 signs we walked through today are not a checklist to make you feel inadequate if you do not possess all of them. They are a diagnostic map. They show you where your cognitive architecture is strong and where it needs reinforcement. And the beauty of Piaget's framework is that it gives you the blueprint for that reinforcement. If you struggle with questioning emotional appeals, you need to practice decentering. Put yourself in situations where you feel strong emotion, and then deliberately step back and ask, what is the evidence independent of what I am feeling? If you miss contradictions that others point out, you need to work on conservation and reversibility. Start holding multiple pieces of information in mind simultaneously and actively comparing them. Write things down. Map arguments visually. Train your mind to see relationships between ideas instead of processing each idea in isolation. If you collapse when you lack external validation, you need to build autonomy. Start with small decisions where you choose based purely on your own evaluation and gradually increase the stakes. Notice the discomfort of standing alone and learn that it does not destroy you. If you accept ideas without testing them against outcomes, start making predictions. Say, if this is true, then I should observe this specific result, and then check whether you do. Keep a record. Let reality be your teacher instead of your enemy. If you take information at face value without scanning for omissions, practice asking what is missing from this picture every single time you encounter persuasive communication. Make it a reflex. Train yourself to construct the absent context. If you defend beliefs even when evidence contradicts them, start small. Pick one belief that is not central to your identity and deliberately seek out the strongest arguments against it. Sit with them. See if you can accommodate without collapsing. Build the muscle of intellectual flexibility in low-stakes environments before applying it to high-stakes beliefs. And if you get trapped in binary thinking, start naming third options out loud. When someone presents a dichotomy, stop and say, what am I being forced to ignore by accepting these as the only 2 choices? Train your mind to see complexity as normal rather than threatening. What Piaget understood, and what most people miss, is that cognitive development is not about becoming smarter in the sense of processing speed or memory capacity. It is about building more sophisticated structures for organizing and evaluating information. A person with an IQ of 120, who has developed formal operational thought and equilibration, will be far more resistant to manipulation than a person with an IQ of 140, who has arrested at concrete operations. Intelligence without structure is just raw processing power with no quality control. It can be fast, impressive, and completely wrong. Structure is what allows you to direct that processing power toward truth instead of toward whatever feels good or sounds convincing. And the evidence for this is everywhere. Think about the brilliant people you know who fall for obvious scams. Think about the educated people who join cults. Think about the accomplished professionals who stay in abusive relationships. Think about the intellectuals who adopt ideologies that crumble under the slightest scrutiny. These are not failures of intelligence. They are failures of cognitive structure. And the hopeful thing, the thing that should make you feel powerful right now, is that structure can be built. It is not about waiting for some insight or breakthrough. It is about consistent practice of specific cognitive skills in environments that support disequilibrium and accommodation. Let me tell you what happens when you build these structures fully. You walk into a room where everyone is excited about an idea, and you feel no pressure to join the excitement until you have evaluated the idea yourself. You hear a persuasive speaker, and you appreciate the craftsmanship of their rhetoric, while simultaneously analyzing the quality of their reasoning. You encounter information that contradicts something you believed deeply, and your first response is curiosity rather than defensiveness. You make a decision that everyone around you thinks is wrong, and you feel calm instead of anxious because you know you have done the cognitive work to verify your position. You notice when you are being lied to, not because you are cynical, but because the lie does not fit the pattern of evidence you have accumulated. You change your mind publicly without shame, because you understand that updating beliefs is a sign of a functioning cognitive system, not a character flaw. You hold complexity without needing to resolve it prematurely into simplistic narratives. You live in a world full of people trying to shape your perception, and you remain fundamentally yourself, fundamentally clear, fundamentally free. This is not invulnerability. You will still make mistakes. You will still be wrong about things. You will still be influenced by people and ideas, and you should be because influence is how we learn. But you will not be manipulated. You will not be controlled. You will not surrender your cognitive autonomy to anyone, no matter how charismatic, credible, or convincing they appear. Your mind will have become, in the most literal sense, impossible to manipulate because the structures required to manipulate you will not find purchase. It is like trying to hack a system that does not run the vulnerable software. The exploit simply does not work. I want to recognize something before we finish. You have made it to the end of this exploration, which means you are someone who cares about understanding how your mind works. You are not satisfied with surface-level explanations or comforting platitudes. You want the architecture. You want to know what is actually happening in your cognitive development and how to direct it deliberately. That is rare. Most people never ask these questions. They drift through life with whatever cognitive structures they happen to build through circumstance, never realizing that they have agency in this process. But you are here. You are asking. You are thinking about your own thinking, which is the foundation of metacognition and the prerequisite for everything we have discussed. That matters. Your willingness to engage with this material is itself evidence that your mind is building or has already built some of these structures. You are not passive. You are not waiting to be told what to think. You are actively constructing your cognitive autonomy, and that is something to honor in yourself. If this resonates with you, if you recognize yourself in this process of building a mind that cannot be manipulated, I want to invite you to continue this journey with us. This is not the only video on this channel. This is part of an ongoing exploration of how Piaget's insights into cognitive development apply to every dimension of adult life, from relationships to career decisions, to political thinking, to personal identity. Every week, we go deep into one aspect of how your mind constructs reality and how you can participate in that construction deliberately rather than letting it happen by default. We are building a community of people who care about intellectual honesty, cognitive autonomy, and the kind of mental clarity that allows you to live with integrity in a world that constantly pressures you to compromise. If that sounds like where you want to be, if that sounds like the kind of ongoing conversation you need in your life, just click the button below. Join us. Continue discovering. We are going deeper into this material with every video, and having you as part of this community makes the exploration richer for everyone. You are not just consuming content. You are participating in a collective effort to understand and strengthen the cognitive structures that protect human autonomy. That is the work. That is what we are doing here together. So take that first step. Click the button. Let us keep building these structures together. And if you want to go even further into how Piaget's framework explains everyday psychological experiences, the next video you should watch explores something that confuses almost everyone. Why do intelligent people stay in situations that are obviously harmful? Why do they ignore evidence that is right in front of them? Why does knowing better not translate into doing better? The answer has everything to do with schema rigidity and the conditions under which accommodation becomes psychologically impossible. It is called the cognitive trap that keeps you stuck, and it will completely change how you understand why change is so difficult and what actually makes it possible. You will find it right here. I will see you there, and thank you for thinking deeply with me today. Your mind is more powerful than you have been taught to believe, and every step you take toward understanding its architecture is a step toward freedom that no one can take from you.